Hi there. My name is Alex Blank. I'm one of the physical therapists here at Manual Therapy Specialists in Fairfield, Connecticut. Here at MTS, we wanted to address one of the most common clinical questions we get, which is why do injuries seemingly come out of nowhere sometimes? A lot of times we find that people come in and there's not a direct cause or known cause to the sources of their symptoms, and there's typically a lot of factors of why that might be. Sometimes those factors can be rather complex. Sometimes they can be generally unknown, but there are some commonalities that we wanted to address in just a little information that might help guide your plan of care. So, if we look at the nature of what we might consider a random injury, also known as an injury with quote unquote insidious onset, unknown onset, um, one of the qualities is it generally comes on gradually and without a known cause. Maybe there's some factors or circumstances around the timing of when that injury might come on. Or there are times when it can present as a result of an activity that really shouldn't have caused injury in a patient's mind. So maybe it's something you do all the time, a simple movement like bending over or reaching up to grab something and you felt a sharp pull or something like that that is linked to that moment, but really doesn't explain why it should have come on as severely as it did. And with the nature of these things, that the symptoms linger longer than expected, and one of the reasons people are coming in to see us is that they're not resolving naturally. So all of these factors can be rather confusing and murky in the minds of any of us experiencing things in our body that we don't like. But some of the information will hopefully bring some light onto that. So if we look at the theoretical framework of this idea of the straw that broke the camel's back or this unknown onset, um, we have to realize that the body can withstand stress up to a point. Um, the real question here is how well can the body withstand stress? What are the variables inside of us that are hard to pinpoint in terms of our stress resilience? So, our overall resilience is really determined by a bunch of factors that we're going to talk about here in a second. And when they're compromised, it can lead us to a greater susceptibility of injury or illness. A common example is that when it's cold or flu season, and we feel relatively run down, we have a greater chance of contracting a cold or a flu. So, just briefly, what is resilience generally? And what we come to find in the research, it's that resilience is our ability to withstand and optimize adversity. So resilience is always in the face of adversity or stress. Is another way to term that. Resilience is a process that relies on persistence and resistance, recovery, adaptation, and transformation. What I mean by that is that it is defined by our ability to persist through this stress or adversity, to overcome it, and sometimes with either a change in our perspective or a change in our body's ability to handle certain types of stress, we can transform it into a good thing. Um, and then, resilience is always a system of trade offs. So, where we might be working really hard to withstand a certain type of stress or form of stress in our life, it's inevitably going to have to take from something else that is working for us. And optimally, those trade offs work hand in hand and in balance, but sometimes when we direct our focus or attention too much in one area, it can leave us susceptible in others. So, going off that, four ways our resilience gets depleted. Um, Typically, that's comes from one of these four categories, which is repeated exposure to small forms of stress. So, the phrase or metaphor out there is death by 1,000 paper cuts. So, repeated exposure over time can lead to decreased resilience. Or there are times when we experience new types of stress that our body doesn't know how to deal with, so it's not practiced and therefore takes a little extra effort and reserve to overcome. Alternatively, there can be sustained or prolonged exposures to stress, so long periods over time where our body is constantly asked to, withstand that form of stress. And then lastly, exposures to big sources of stress, just sudden onset of something massive. And that would be, in this case, a big injury or what we would call a macro trauma or something that impacts the body on a greater level of magnitude. So clinical examples and tying those concepts into practice, common things that I'll see is I sit all day for work, have a really successful job, and don't do anything to offset it. That would be that kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts, where day in and day out we can't really keep up with the many forms of demand of these little stressors. In terms of the second category or new onset of stress to the body is, I started a running program 6 weeks ago and now I'm feeling pain. I was doing something that I thought was good for me, but in this case, the body just didn't know how to withstand the sources of stress, which is exercise. Third category being, I play mostly on the weekends and don't do a lot during the week. That would be more of that prolonged exposure to stress. So I play all weekend. I played 36 holes of golf, and now my back is sore. In that short period of time, had a prolonged exposure to stress that's outside of my norm, and therefore my body's paying the price a little bit. And then that macro trauma or that bigger magnitude of stress suddenly. One that came into the clinic recently was I was helping my daughter move, and when I was lifting a heavy table, it slipped, and when I caught it, I felt pain. In an instant moment, a big force onto the system can result in decreased resilience. So there are some common misconceptions when it comes to random injuries that I just wanted to address quickly. One is that if I sit at a desk all day, that I'm doomed to have these random injuries here and there. Not necessarily true. There are a lot of articles and resources out there that describe that where posture is important, it's not a predictor of whether I'm going to have pain or not, and therefore we have to resort to addressing the other variables around it. Another common misconception is that if I lift heavy weights or I do big movements, that I have a greater exposure to decreased stress resilience, and that's not true either. If we optimize your exercise dosage appropriately, it can lead to increased resilience. Just thinking about getting stronger internally and externally. Thirdly, is that if I exercise regularly, then I will be less prone to decreased resilience and therefore decreased potential for random injuries. And that's not necessarily true either. Again, going back to this idea of exercise dosage, we have to make sure that we're not doing too much and we're not doing too little. So just because one exercises doesn't mean that we have an automatic predisposition towards increased resilience. And then we come back to this idea of balance, that we manage the good stress in our life with the stress that's sometimes overwhelming, and we have a framework that can balance things appropriately. So if we look at these categories and the way that we try to break it down here in the clinic is that there's a variety of things that can impact one's resilience. We talk about each one of these categories in other videos, but just knowing that it's a complex system, that if we look at our mechanical system, our how well our joints and our soft tissues move, our neuromuscular system, how well muscles time with one another and support our body, the habitual patterns and postures of movement that we undergo regularly and how that loads our system, how well our systemic health is, between the foods that we eat and the sleep that we get, how that improves our body's ability to recover, our what we call our loading tolerance, or how well we're able to withstand the internal and external forces of our world, will dictate how resilient one might be at any given time. And stress is an inevitability, whether it's mental, physical, or emotional stress. Having a framework that we can have a perspective that supports resilience is going to allow us a healthier system in the long run. So the interaction of these categories will dictate, how well we might be predisposed to random injuries. So, on the left, we see these drivers that I had previously mentioned on the other page, and they're in complete balance. They are in a place where each one is pushing and pulling on each other appropriately, and therefore, um, we can think of how each one of these might be offsetting each other in a way. However, what we really see is that these drivers might be out of balance, and that we might have to address one of them more than the other when we start dealing with interventions. So that really leads to the question of how can we help as physical therapists? What tools are in our toolbox to help you move forward? Really, it comes down to primarily identifying drivers. What are the factors that are really pushing and pulling on the system primarily, and how we can start to develop a plan to address them specifically or concurrently. Executing the plan, as physical therapists, we will use the tools that we know how to do. So that's manual therapy, maybe from the mechanical side, helping soft tissues and joints move better so that the system feels a little easier when you're moving or staying in static postures, helping the muscles coordinate with one another a little bit more effectively or efficiently, dosing your exercise and prescribing movements that are supportive of your system and helping it back towards resilience, arming you with information that can help you shift your lens towards an effective strategy, and when appropriate, collaborating with the other healthcare practitioners that are in our area or that might be part of your team so that we can get a cohesive plan going forward. So, all of that being said, if we can consistently reinforce and reassess when appropriate, it can help you work towards these addressing these drivers, and therefore help towards this idea of reducing these random injuries or helping you navigate around them in the future. So the end goal essentially is to help create a roadmap, one that helps you navigate around or through the obstacles that we're finding that are present, providing you a framework of things that are helpful in terms of our interventions. There are a ton of potential solutions out there, and connecting you with the ones that are most relevant can help you get to where you need to go. And primarily helping you navigate your own system. We get a bunch of signals from our body all the time, and helping you contextualize and understand those signals with the information that we can help connect you with can be not just a skill in the near term, but for the long term as well. So, if that being said, if you have any questions, Dave, Kate, or myself would love to chat further, and we hope that this has been helpful.